Hello everyone, welcome to this capacity building session that's targeting promoting character education in science. I am your facilitator, Francine Taylor Campbell. Now I know in recent times there has been an increased emphasis on how we can develop character education in our students. And so for this particular session, I'd like to show you how we can approach it while we're teaching science concepts. Now if you look at my screen, you would see that for science in the National Standards Curriculum, the emphasis is on three components. So the concepts that are to be taught, the skills and practices that will basically help to develop those concepts, and the scientific attitudes. So as we teach science, we want to ensure that all three components are given adequate time, all right? Because the attitudes will enable the students to work as scientists. Now, how do we go about focusing on these attitudes? So these are some of the attitudes that we are expecting our students to demonstrate as they carry out certain science process skills, investigations, and of course understand the scientific concepts. So we want them generally to be curious, that's natural, right? But other attitudes like objectivity, intellectual honesty, responsibility, perseverance, and open-mindedness are all attitudes that, if they are developed, will help also to develop their character. So let's look at a few of these to see what they are. So say for instance, curiosity, their ability to wonder, to ask questions, to find out why, right? Intellectual honesty. As scientists, we're often asked to carry out investigations. How will we ensure that we record these observations as we see them without changing them? That speaks to your intellectual honesty. Objectivity, for instance, looks at how we are able to prove our findings using data. So we're not using our opinions, what we believe, we're looking at how the information is proven by the evidence from the data. That is objectivity. Open-mindedness, willingness, of course, to accept other ideas once they are linked to evidence, and perseverance. That attitude of working at something until a solution is found. And so all of these can be developed as we carry out our investigations. Now for science, this is how our curriculum is designed. We have 4 themes, right? Scientific exploration, application, and design practice, and also scientific attitudes and ethics. That's also a theme in science. So it may not be explicit in terms of the lessons, but we have different components, which I'll show you later, that seeks to develop those. And then of course our content, our concepts would be coming from living things, life processes and the environment, and energy, forces, and matter. So if you look at my screen, you will see that 2 of the themes would be targeting the concepts, while the other 2 themes will be targeting the process skills, the methods, and the attitudes, because you can't teach science without looking at the method. All right, and so that is how the curriculum is designed. And within the curriculum, there are different now areas that target these different concepts and skills. So we have our theme. These are some terms that you will come across in the curriculum. Standards and attainment targets, that gives you more or less some goals and objectives to be achieved for a particular period. Benchmarks, which would cover your grade level expectations. So as they move from one grade to the next, what are the things that they must master? Those are our benchmarks, right? And of course our objectives and our learning outcomes, which we're already familiar with. So again, our broad curriculum framework just ensuring that we understand how that is set up, right? The 4 themes are shown, and for each theme, we will break that down into standards and attainment targets. So let's look at the scientific attitudes and ethics. Let's look at that theme. So we have standards such as developing a spirit of inquiry and perseverance, open-mindedness, developing integrity and responsibility and value for science. And as we go through the grades, you can see how that is fostered, right? Grades 1 to 3, they start to develop stewardship for their environment. Grades 4 to 6, understanding the limitations of science, for instance. And grades 7 to 9, appreciate the influence of science, looking at ethical issues. So as you go through the grades, you can see how those standards are broken out into our attainment targets. And likewise, if we should look at our benchmarks, right, for that same theme, scientific attitudes and ethics, we will see how those benchmarks, right, are broken out. So grade 1, even though they're at grade 1, they can show concern for the environment by being responsible, right? But by the time they reach grade 3, they want to show concern for living things and the environment, right? Grades 4 and 5, they're looking at man's impact on the environment, for instance. And by grade 6, they want to show concern and be respectful as well as responsible towards the environment. So those themes obviously are moving, right, from one grade to the next. They are being developed. And so in the curriculum, there are specific objectives that target these attitudes. So we know the usual ones that we always see in the lesson plans: work cooperatively in groups, but that's not the only thing that we want to develop. We want them to be able to show respect for the ideas of others. Those are objectives that we can pull into our lessons. We want them to show objectivity. We spoke of that earlier. What's objectivity? To be able to base your findings on data, nothing else, not on your opinions, right? So there's an objective, especially in the grade 5 science curriculum, that says show objectivity by seeking and using data and information to validate observations and explanations. So as they carry out their investigations, record their results, and you want to find out, what is the conclusion, right? What is this showing? The response that is given must be based on the data that they collected, right? And so they're using that to validate their observations and explanations. Other scientific attitudes that are basically incorporated into objectives. For instance, there's this one: show concern by being responsible towards plants and animals. So in grade 4, as they look at living things, you want them to start to show that sort of responsibility towards the living things around them, as well as curiosity in their environment. So let's look at this very simple lesson, right? And we'll show you how throughout this lesson plan, we are incorporating the character education principles through the lens of the scientific attitudes as we go through the lesson. So here's the lesson on your screen. We're in grade 5, looking at forces and work, and the topic is investigating the effects of friction. So think about it. A lesson on investigating friction definitely will involve actual investigation. All right, so these are our attainment targets. We're looking at the importance of energy to life processes, right? We're looking at understanding of aspects of the scientific method. Because we're investigating, we choose the attainment targets that align with that investigation. We're looking at developing an appreciation for science, influence and limitations of science, and demonstrating a positive attitude towards the use of scientific language. So those attainment targets, actually, at least 2 of them would be targeting this scientific attitude. So from our attainment targets, we're targeting our scientific attitudes, and as shown on your screen. And then if we now should look at our benchmarks, so in our lesson plan, we look at our attainment targets, related benchmarks, right? So they're understanding the effects of forces and work, making predictions, right? And then we also want them to display curiosity, objectivity, and perseverance. All those are targeting the scientific attitude. So within our lesson, we would be also pulling in that into our lesson. All right? And then our objectives, so we're coming down the line, right? So our objectives will also targeting the concepts of friction, which is what the topic is about, but look at the other objectives. We're making measurements, we're looking at patterns, so we're working on the skills. We're showing objectivity by using data to validate our observations, and we're showing perseverance in completing investigations. So as they go through the lesson, you want to ensure that those attitudes, right, are targeted and reinforced throughout the lesson. So how will that look in the lesson? So from our content, although we have our concepts that are identified, what are forces, how they affect size and shape and motion, and basically what friction represents and how we can reduce friction, all that is important. But because we're also looking at how this lesson can be targeting our scientific attitudes and hence character education, you notice there's also a statement about perseverance. So it says scientific attitude of perseverance is demonstrated by redoing tasks, reviewing difficult aspects of tasks, and adopting new approaches to problem solve, showing continuous effort in the face of failure. So essentially, we want to teach our learners not to give up. How do you bring that out in science? As they carry out an investigation, as they work on a particular design, right? As they develop a prototype for some activity, they may fail at first, right? But we want them to keep trying to do it over, to improve on their designs, right? That is helping them to develop perseverance. And so we can actually pull that into our lessons. Beautiful. All right. So in our engagement, and while we're engaging, we can be evaluating, right? Some pre-assessments can be done. And so in the activities shown, we see that the students are going to be assessed first of all for their prior knowledge. Then they'll carry out an activity, either watching a video to show persons making fire, right? And back in the good old days, I guess they would rub some sticks together and we get fire, right? But what is that actually doing? Yes? Or rubbing their hands together, rubbing stones together. And the purpose of this activity is for them to discuss it, and then they will see that process of rubbing the two surfaces together will generate heat, which essentially would suggest to us that friction, right, that force is in play. Now notice also in that first activity, students are going to be reminded, because remember we're reinforcing perseverance. So they will be reminded from then that, you know, a part of being a good scientist is to, you know, go over your investigations, redo them if they weren't successful at first. Again, that is something we are trying to work on during the lesson. So you have to reinforce it, you have to mention it, you have to, you know, essentially prepare them for what would happen if they were not successful initially. All right, so that is highlighted on our screen. And then for them to explore, obviously they're investigating what would happen if we, for instance, roll a ball on different surfaces, for instance, and to see the effects of friction. So they're investigating that, right? They're carrying out a fear test, so the teacher will ensure that that is being done, right? But also, as they carry out their investigation and look at their checklist, Notice again, the teacher will reinforce. Look back at your investigation, right? Did you follow the fair test requirements? What did you do to obtain accurate results? If you didn't get the results in the first place, how did you treat with failure? So that aspect of treating with failure, trying again, persevering, again is reinforced as the lesson is continued. All right? Again, remember our focus is on how we promote character education in science. And then as they explain, the students are going to be sharing what they found out. All right, good. Teacher will check on those responses. Students will then make some connections for elaborate with the use of everyday activities, right? Things that they do on a regular basis as they roll something on the floor. If they're moving a heavy object, for instance, get a delivery of some appliance, right? A refrigerator, for instance. How can you move it in such a way, right, that you will exert less pressure on yourself? You use wheels, for instance, right? Good. Or if you have, persons operate machinery, after a while, you will find that the parts, get a little rusted or something. How do we prevent that? You add something like oil, right, to reduce friction. So they will basically make those connections with everyday activities that make use of friction, or at least how to reduce that friction. All right, and then finally in the evaluation, and you notice we would have been evaluating throughout the lesson, right? We're practicing formative assessment, but you will see now that in evaluating, if it is that you are targeting this attitude, this character that you wanted to develop, your evaluation should also incorporate that. So apart from the usual evaluation of a worksheet or something, looking at their investigative plan, there's also an evaluation that's targeting their experiences, right? So they will complete a tool, a self-reflective tool, where they will look at their experiences, what they learned about failure, for instance, how they felt about doing the thing over and getting it correct, that sort of thing, and looking at their corrective actions that would now be taken after they have assessed themselves. And so this represents a way in which we could incorporate character education in our science lessons by targeting those scientific attitudes that are already written and incorporated into your science curriculum. So let's ask ourselves, how will you incorporate character education in your lessons? Think about it. Let us know. That's all for today. See you next time.